We're live.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. May peace be upon you. This is Edward Ahmed Mitchell, the Deputy Director of CAIR National, welcoming you to today's episode of CAIR on Air, the Muslim Action Hour. Thank you so much for joining us for today's program. Today is June 30th, 2020. We hope you are doing well. We hope your families are doing well and staying safe during these trying times for our nation and people around the world. I'm very happy to welcome on today my co-host and our special guest, Brother Ahmad Rafiki, who is the Civil Rights Coordinator with CAIR San Francisco Bay Area. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Ahmad. How are you?
Alaikum salam, Brother Edward. Thank you for having me on. Doing well and trying to work through these issues. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, no complaints, no complaints. We're always happy to welcome our brothers from and sisters from the California area. So we're here today to discuss an important topic, which is, as you know, Brother Ma, the issue of Yemeni Americans being trapped overseas in Yemen, in a very dangerous situation, not only because of the conflict that's going on over there, but because of COVID-19 and the travel restrictions. And we've seen CAIR and numerous other organizations stepping up to try to help secure entry for these people to get out of Yemen and back to their homes here in the United States. And so today the program will be discussing what the problem is, what has been done so far to address the problem, and what work remains to be done. So first, Ahmad, let me ask you to just tell us, for people who are not familiar with this problem, this situation, what is the problem? What is going on in Yemen? What is the issue?
Well, I think, our guests later on the show will talk about the broader issue of the conflict in Yemen, the civil war, the humanitarian crisis. But what I want to narrow our attention and my sort of work on and our CAIR's work on this is, as everyone knows, we're in the middle of a once-in-a-lifetime global pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. Yemeni Americans, like other Americans, have traveled either to countries such as Yemen, Peru, Morocco. We saw individuals American nationals, so that's U.S. citizens and green card holders and visa holders who are overseas when the U.S. government in March decided to close its borders. We saw countries across the world closing their borders as well. And in that rush, that confusion, you had Yemeni Americans who are now in Yemen visiting their families. Let's remember, Yemeni Americans are forced to visit their families because of the Muslim ban. The Muslim ban means that they're separated from their families, and the only way they get to see their spouses, their children, their parents, their cousins, their friends is to actually go back to Yemen, even in the midst of a civil war, even while they have to travel to places like Djibouti or even Oman or Saudi Arabia, so they can then travel by land. So taking arduous journeys just to see their family members. All of a sudden, the U.S. government closes borders, and the Yemeni government, whatever that exists of it, as well as their international allies in Saudi Arabia, Oman, also closed their borders. Flights were canceled for Yemeni Americans trying to come back in. Now, for the first month or so, individuals kept on contacting the State Department to try to find a way to come back, and people bore it out. But now where we find ourselves in, the United Nations, through the WHO, has declared there to be a near total collapse of medical health facilities in Yemen. The cases for COVID-19, like in our nation currently, are rising at an astronomical rate. There is no real access to medical life-saving equipment. There is about an estimated 1,000 or so ventilators all across the nation. This is for a country of many million people. And Yemeni Americans also don't have access, like other Yemenis, to medications, medical supplies that are urgent and needed. We have clients who face amputation and require urgent surgery who want to come back to the US. There are people who have jobs that they had to leave for what was supposed to be a month or so vacation, and now they've been stuck for 3-4 months. People have businesses that they've lost. And certainly there are individuals who had valid visas to come and finally be reunited. One of the few families that got a waiver from the Muslim ban. And now all these individuals are indeed stuck. And where we find ourselves in is that the State Department and the government of the United States has finally started to work with its embassy in Jeddah and Riyadh to expatriate and repatriate Yemeni Americans. Now, I think, Brother, you may ask me that question later. We're in a phase where some flights are being arranged, but there are other issues too. I'll sort of let you ask the questions as they come in, and I think we'll talk about that as the conversation goes along.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So I think this is a good moment to bring in our special guest, Dr. Debbie Elmonteser, who I'll introduce momentarily. And while we're bringing in Debbie, why don't we play a video which shows the first set of flights coming in to Dulles Airport in Virginia over the weekend. These are just a small number of the many Yemeni Americans who remain stranded. Some of them were able to get back to America on State Department approved flights, thanks to the work of people like Dr. Debbie and you, Brother Ahmad, and others around the country. Let's play that video, then we'll bring on Dr. Debbie Elmonteser to discuss. These are just some of the families who made it back, reuniting with their relatives after a very dangerous situation. Right on, you can pause it there. We just want to do a little glimpse. So those are just some people, but as we've noted, there are many, many more people who are still stuck overseas. So let's now bring in our special guest for today to discuss this in more detail. I'm very happy to welcome on Dr. Debbie Elmonteser, who many of you know. She is the leader of the Yemeni American Merchants Association New York, which is doing great work to fight for justice in that state. She's also a policy advisor to Engage New York, senior advisor to Engage New York, among many other roles, including board president of the Muslim Community Network. She has been a leader in the fight for justice, not only for Muslims in America, but for all Americans, including the fight against Islamophobia here in the United States. And we're very happy to have her on the program today. Assalamu alaikum, doctor. How are you?
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you so much for having me. This is such a timely conversation, and I want to thank your chapter for inviting us to speak about this. And I also want to amplify, CAIR New York, as well as CAIR National, for actually making this an issue and partnering with us on bringing home Yemeni American citizens. What is presently happening to Yemeni Americans is absolutely outrageous. And as Brother Ahmad, began to talk about what the circumstances are for Yemeni Americans, one, we are living under an indefinite Muslim ban that has affected thousands upon thousands, both here in the US and in Yemen, and Yemeni families that are refugees in Djibouti and Malaysia and India and Jordan and Egypt, that have been lingering there for months, even years, waiting for their visa approval to be able to reunite with their families. And so what we're seeing today is not anything different than the treatment that our community has experienced. One of the things that people tend to forget is when the war broke out in 2015, the United States was the only nation in the world that did not evacuate its American citizens out of Yemen. Yemeni Americans had to find their own way to evacuate Yemen. And it's pretty devastating. Devastating to have Yemeni Americans being approached by Russia to evacuate them. This is a systemic issue that, we are seeing Yemeni Americans face day in and day out. And, we have to continue organizing and mobilizing and pushing elected officials to understand that Yemeni Americans need to be given their, civil rights and do like other citizens in this country.
Right. The Yemeni Americans are as American as anyone else, and for that matter, they are as human as anyone else. So, both you, Ahmad, and you, Debbie, have noted something very important, which is the issue, I think, of Islamophobia and racism in this differential treatment. If you had white Americans who were trapped in Yemen for whatever reason, I'm pretty sure, you'd be having flights going very quickly to grab them. Because people are Yemeni American, there's assumption, they're not fully American. We don't have to worry about them. Am I right in noticing that, perceiving that, or what do you think, Doctor?
I think that you are on target. Again, this is, something that we are seeing systemically happening over the course of, not just the last 4 years, but for a very long time. The community has been discredited. The community has been ignored. And it's only, within the last 4 years that we have started to organize and mobilize. And what I call the Yemeni American community is the sleeping giant that finally woke up. And what woke up the community to demand its right at the table is the Muslim ban. When individuals saw that this was affecting their livelihood, their family, not being able to be with them, they realized that they needed to exercise their rights and to demand the justice that they're due. We see this across the board, and even for decades, like, the number of people in communities that didn't even know that their local bodega or their, the local store, corner store was actually owned by Yemeni Americans is now becoming something like, oh, I had no idea that they were Yemeni, until the bodega strike happened. Now I know who they are and where they come from. So, it's a systemic problem that we're seeing. And, I'm glad that we're working on this issue and making sure, that we are advocating for Yemeni Americans to be able to come back. It's outrageous that we've only been able to negotiate 2 flights.
Yeah.
There should be more flights because there are thousands of people. And, as Ahmad started talking about some of the cases, right now, COVID-19 is rampant there. They don't have the facilities. They don't have the equipment. They don't have the medical, experience on how to deal with COVID-19. In addition to that, the other issue is that Yemen right now is the worst humanitarian crisis on the face of the earth. With the water drought, with the whole situation of the war that's continued to ravage the country, it does not have the infrastructure. And as Ahmad mentioned, many people are forced to go to Yemen to see their families because they have not been able to bring them to the United States. And so because of this issue, people are risking their lives to go see their mother, their father, their siblings, because they are not able to come to the United States. And for us to make this much noise and to apply political pressure on congressional leaders and senators to be able to just get 2 flights, there's something wrong here. There should be multiple flights. Why is it that we have individuals in other nations able to get on a flight and come home without any issue? Is the question, the $1 million question.
Yeah, and I think sadly we know the answer. Ahmad, I know you got a question for Dr. Debbie.
Yeah, actually, Dr. Debbie, in our work at CAIR, we noticed, to add to your point, in February and March, when American citizens in Peru and Morocco were stranded, you saw the U.S. government acting immediately. They weren't asking them questions of whether they were Muslim Americans, Yemeni Americans. They acted immediately because they were treated and seen as U.S. nationals. And this is something in our advocacy of the State Department we've asked is why this differential treatment, and the excuse given often is we don't have an embassy or consulate, but we do have very great, strong ties, unfortunately, with the Saudi government and others, which could mandate that. I guess my question for you, Dr. Montasser, is what exactly should we be asking the State Department? What do we ask of our congressional representatives to ensure not only that there's additional flights, there's also the matter of Yemeni Americans have been forced to stay now in Yemen with expired passports, expired visas, and now the State Department might be putting up a barrier there. But what are our asks for the State Department and our congressional representatives? Like, what could be something that we should be focusing on, all of us as Americans, Muslim or otherwise?
Well, first and foremost, to address the very issues that you just raised, Ahmad, is we need an American embassy in Yemen. It's plain and simple. That is the answer. That is the solution to be able to address the needs of Yemeni Americans who are visiting their families, and for their family members to be able to come to the United States. Now, I've heard so many, concerns of like, well, the country's not stable, the civil war, that there is a stable, part of the country that they can actually set up shop and have an American embassy that would actually be able to permit the American embassy to cater to the needs of all of Yemeni Americans and their families. And so I think that, the first and foremost, the number one priority is establishing an American embassy in Aden, which is right now the most stable place for them to be able to operate. Second, we need, Congress and the Senate to push the State Department to assemble this embassy as soon as possible. And third, we cannot turn our back on what is happening in Yemen. The U.S. plays a critical role in this whole entire conflict. It is a part of this coalition, the Saudi-led coalition. What we need right now is, never mind this coalition, bring all stakeholders to the table and renegotiate where they started negotiating at the negotiating table 6 years ago, and address the conflict and build a government that is reflective of the very people and the very movements that are there. And then for all of these nations who've been a part of this, Saudi-led coalition, they all need to provide the country of Yemen reparations. There are no operational hospitals. There are no operational schools. There are no operational, centers that can provide, people the support that they need. The very little amount of humanitarian relief agencies that are there cannot meet the dire needs of Yemenis. And so that region needs to be stabilized and to be rebuilt.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Absolutely. No, I was just saying it's right on point. I mean, it's so important to put this in context. You have some people who are bigoted and say something like, well, they went to Yemen, it's their fault, that they're stuck there. And that's crazy when you hear, not it's crazy in general, but especially when you think about the context of why they were there in the first place, why they're stuck there, how disproportionate and different they would be treated if they were anybody else, and the fact that the conflict in that country continues to rage because our government supports and funds the violence. So, I mean, these are all important issues that need to be addressed. So can we talk about any specific cases that you all are working on or helping with, any particularly egregious ones that would highlight how horrible this situation is? And on top of that, I would ask, do you know how many people are left? Like, is there an estimate of how many people we need to get back to America? Or is it we just know it's in the thousands and we don't have a particular number?
So that's a really great question for you to ask, Edward. First and foremost, when the U.S. government actually allocated these 2 flights, we had no idea how many seats were on these flights. Whether they were going to be able to accommodate 500, 1,500, we had no idea. The other thing that was also problematic was there are thousands of Yemeni Americans that are stuck there, but don't have the technology to be plugged in and know what is going on right now. As I mentioned earlier, the infrastructure in Yemen is devastated. There are days that people have internet access. There are days that they don't have internet access. Not everybody has a cell phone, or a smartphone to be plugged in. And so, the only way that we've been able to find out about family members being stuck is because of their family members in the United States calling us and saying, my husband, my children, are stuck. They're not able to come back. And that's how it all emerged for us, that we actually started posting on social media. And then there was a groundswell of people saying, I'm in the same boat too. And so between CAIR New York and Yama, we've been able to get as many people to complete the form that CAIR created for us to create this database of individuals that are affected. But we by no means can say that we have the complete count of people that are stuck in Yemen. The other thing that we have been struggling with, both locally and nationally, is the fact that we have hundreds upon hundreds of individuals who have petitioned for their family members and are in administrative processing. And now you have the ban of travel for COVID, and that further delayed things. So I'll give you some examples of cases right now that we are dealing with that are really, really heartbreaking. In 2017, a gentleman received a diversity visa. He won it. He was able to get his whole entire family visas except for his wife. His wife was left in Yemen because he had 12 months to use those visas. If he did not use them, he was going to lose that diversity visa. Mm-hmm. And he had to make the conscious decision to take himself and his 4 children and come to the United States. He gets here, doesn't have a job, doesn't have family, and had to fend for himself and his children, and then support his wife, who was waiting for her administrative processing to finish. As of this day, that has not finished. Her process, she remains in administrative processing. And the sad and unfortunate thing about this case, we were working with his family, and he was very afraid of putting him in touch with the media to shine a light on this issue. He felt that if he did, he might lose his entire chance. We told him we did everything we could. We worked with, Debbie Dingell, his congressional leader. They did everything that they could. And then what we found out was he actually sent his children to Yemen because he could not work and take care of them.
At the same time, yeah.
So exactly. So then he calls us and he says, "Oh my God, I need to get my children out of Yemen. COVID is there, and I'm really, terrified for their safety." And now we have his children who are stranded there, who actually have green cards and can come, but his situation is not going to change. If they get on that flight and he doesn't have his wife to take care of them, what good is it for her, for them to be here? So these are the tragic stories that we are dealing with, because of the Muslim ban.
Gotcha.
Another incident is, in this case, we worked with Ahmed Mohammed at CAIR New York. We had a bodega worker actually get shot in February. He is the only son to this family. The father passed away. He was a caretaker of his mother and his sister. And his mother's last wish was to see him before they buried him. We were actually able to get an expedited visa for them. And all they needed was the affidavit of support, and things were going to move for her to come. COVID happened, and sadly, she was not permitted to come, even though that there were flights that were still coming in March. She was not able to get all of her paperwork to be able to come. Sadly, her son ended up getting buried because the family couldn't keep him, not buried. She didn't get to see him. And the more tragic piece of it is that he wasn't able to have an Islamic janazah because of social distancing. 3 weeks to, and then even, as you know, New York City was the epicenter of COVID-19. There weren't even any Islamic funeral homes able to prepare his burial. He had to be on a waiting list because there were so many COVID-19 that needed to be buried. I mean, there were freezers, tractor trailer freezers out there, with, bodies, waiting to be buried. So it's been really a devastating time for Yemeni Americans in New York and nationally.
Ahmad.
So as we wrap up our program, Dr. Debbie, my question for you then, and for everyone listening, is how can folks get in touch with CAIR, YAMA, the Yemeni Alliance Committee, and others working on this issue? What is the need of the hour for Yemeni Americans, people who may be listening, may know of their neighbors or Yemeni American? How can we create a groundswell of support, as well as get people to reach out to our offices, because unfortunately the way Congress works is if you don't show them the actual magnitude of this issue, they're likely to ignore it, as you know they've done with the Yemen issue for years. So I think it'd be important for us to get a sense. And then also, how many people, I think to Edward's, how many people do you estimate are still left in Yemen who would need this assistance right now and should be reaching out to Yama or CAIR?
My fair estimate, I would say that there are at least 5,000 people that are stranded in Yemen, young, old, and in between. And also, I would say that these are family members who should have rightfully been able to reunite with their family members if all of these visa interruptions didn't happen. And it could be even higher than that. I think what we need to do, the call to action for people viewing and watching, is if you have a Yemeni American family member, by marriage, someone who is your neighbor, someone who's your colleague, someone who is your peer, in school, ask them if they have any family members that are stuck in Yemen. And if they say yes, then urge them to contact CAIR New York, CAIR California, CAIR Michigan, and also to contact Yama. We get calls from all over the country, by Yemeni Americans, because they have seen us as an organization supporting and representing them. And because we know that this is, a bigger issue than what we can handle as a New York-based organization, it was only, the natural fit to basically, coordinate and collaborate with CAIR because of the fact that there were so many chapters. And so when we get these calls, we immediately send them the link, the CAIR link, to actually complete the application, to give us all of the data about themselves. So that's one way that we can, have, our allies in the Muslim community and outside of our community, because in New York City, for example, the bodega, the corner store, is the epicenter of communities. I want all of, New Yorkers, and other cities that have these kinds of stores, ask your local store owner and the clerk, if they have family stuck, and then tell them what they can do. The other thing that we also need to do is continue the pressure on congressional and Senate leaders to pressure the State Department to add additional flights. And then the third is to also put pressure on the State Department to give out loans to families that cannot afford to come to the United States to pay for their ticket. Even though that the State Department has arranged for these flights, the expectation is for these individuals to pay. There are so many families that right now, with COVID and people not being able to work, that don't have the financial means. And I can guarantee you that those are people that have not gotten those on those flights because they don't have the financial means. And I've seen in the past that the State Department has actually provided that kind of assistance, financial assistance, where they actually have the individual, the American citizen, write a MOU, and when they come to the United States, are given a grace period to pay it back. I think that that's also something that we need to pressure the State Department to provide families that cannot pay for their airline tickets.
Right. And it's not like our government can't afford to cover the costs of evacuating Americans from a dangerous war zone. I mean, that's what the military is there for, right? Is to rescue Americans in a time like this. So it's just a remarkable situation on so many levels. But alhamdulillah, that is what you have organizations like the Yemeni American Merchant Association, CAIR, and so many others to handle this kind of work. So Dr. Debbie Al-Muntasir, we thank you so much for the work you're doing. May Allah reward you. May Allah grant relief to all the people of Yemen and especially the families who are suffering difficulty because of COVID-19 and the war there. And Brother Ahmad, you as well. Thank you so much for the work you're doing out in CAIR for San Francisco. And thank you, of course, to our repeated guest, Brother Ahmed of CAIR New York, and that whole team for the work they are doing. It's 3:36, so we're at time, but I just want to say thank you all for the subject. And again, if you need help If you want to know how you can help, please contact the Yemeni American Merchant Association, or a CAIR chapter in your state or area. CAIR New York if you're out there, CAIR San Francisco if you're there. You can contact CAIR National as well if you live in a state without a CAIR chapter, or any other civil rights organization you want to that is willing and able to help, so that we can try to help your families and you to make sure you can get home safely and securely, inshallah. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Ahmad,
Jazakumullah khair.
Wayaki. And thank you, Ahmad, as well, for joining us.
Thank you. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining today's episode of CAIR on Air, the Muslim Action Hour. Inshallah, we will see you on Thursday at 3 o'clock for our next episode. Please stay safe and make dua for our brothers and sisters in Yemen and all around the world. Assalamu alaikum. May peace